In the summer of 1812, American forces invade Canada through Detroit, but they are soon forced to retreat and surrender the fort. Fort Dearborn in Chicago is also captured. Harrison leads the counterattack in the west. Andrew Jackson pursues the tribes of the Southwest.
In the end, at the Battle of the Thames, Tecumseh loses. He fights to the end and is killed. But he still serves as a symbol to many Native people to resist, to remember that this is a Native America and that Indian people must stand against injustices as they see injustices. In the aftermath of the war, then, the tribes were spent. They had tried unification, they had tried a military means of standing against the United States, and none of this had worked. And so they needed to find a new way of survival, a new way of fighting the United States.
The victories over the tribes, however, are not enough to win the war.
In August of 1814, the British march on Washington City, and they burn the White House down, in addition to other government buildings. And they do this for very obvious reasons. They think, according to their foreign intelligence, that the Americans aren't very united. There's a lot of fighting between these sort of parties, Federalist and Republicans. And it's such a small capital and so weak and not really developed. They think if they just come in and burn it, that the whole Republican experiment will fall apart. And they were almost right. But what they hadn't counted on was that far from being demoralized, the American citizenry, who up to this point had not been too supportive of the War of 1812, were galvanized into action, and though the war would only last a few more months, fought very hard for their new country because they were insulted by what had happened.
The Americans didn't lose it, and that's all that was necessary. Despite a symbolic slap in the face with the burning of Washington, the British had no interest in reestablishing an empire in the United States. It was a sideshow for the British, who were intent on destroying Napoleon in Europe. And one of the things that's hard for us to understand now is how Americans could have interpreted their survival as a great victory. They did so because, again, the standard was that a people's government, a republic, had withstood the greatest power on earth. It had not lost.
And then several incidents happened that were somewhat coincident, but fortuitous. And one was the Hartford Convention. And as you know, there were some New Englanders who conspired to basically secede from the Union. When the Hartford Convention was on their way to Washington and heard about Andrew Jackson's, decisive battle, even though the war was over, that movement completely fell apart.
Those people who were enthusiastic supporters for the war knew what a near thing it had been, how close the Americans had come to losing the war or having to negotiate a much less favorable peace than they were able to negotiate, because they see that the survival of Jefferson's Union, a union of free Republican states, is impossible in a dangerous world without some institutions of federal authority that can effectively manage a war effort. And it's really the most eloquent commentary on Americans' near disastrous loss of that war that the victors would say, to consolidate this victory, we're going to have to prepare better for the next war. And every American leader of this generation knew there would be another war. The irony is they didn't know that that war would be a war among Americans.